I'm here at a BP gas station in my hometown of Concord, North Carolina, and just right over here is a FreeWire EV charger that has been out of service and covered since FreeWire went out of business. About a year ago it seems. And FreeWire going out of business, putting units like this out of service was a pretty heavy blow to the EV community, but also the owner-operators trying to make a go of EV charging as a business. However, this pales in comparison to the hellscape that we would see if ChargePoint goes out of business. And sadly, that seems to be where the story of ChargePoint is headed.
In the United States, the markets are governed by capitalist forces, which are basically survival of the fittest. And in my opinion, ChargePoint as a company was designed for a bygone era where they were the preeminent domestic manufacturer of electric vehicle equipment and also had a pretty heavy subscription model that was baked into their sales funnel. So not only did they do one-off sales, which are called non-reoccurring charges, but they also had a subscription model, which had reoccurring charges in order to have a very healthy balance sheet. Problem is, it's not very customer-centric. There is that deal that you're trying to nickel and dime your customers to death. And if you install a ChargePoint, you need also ChargePoint equipment on your site in order to communicate back to the ChargePoint network. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But let's talk about what happened here. In 2023, Mercedes-Benz debuted their high-powered charging network in Sandy Springs, Georgia with these ChargePoint Express Plus units. And talk of $1 billion getting invested into EV charging, which was a very large order. And there was some thought that ChargePoint might not actually have enough production capacity in order to fill all these orders. If you look here, there's a very large station. This actually isn't all the dispensers at this station, so it's a very large station, and this was going to be replicated many times over throughout the United States. So a very large order for ChargePoint. And these are their new ChargePoint Express Plus units with the power bricks fully stacked with power modules in order to dispense 400 kilowatts. But things changed. And what changed was the BABA, Build America, Buy America, portions of the Inflation Reduction Act encourage European manufacturers, specifically Kempower and Alpitronic, to start producing hardware in the United States in order to receive credits from the Inflation Reduction Act stipulations, needing to have those manufactured in the United States. After that happened, things began to change very quickly, and let's go over some of those changes. So there's Mercedes-Benz, which was lining up for ChargePoint. There was also, though, the other 800-pound gorilla in the room is Walmart. Similarly, they had ChargePoint Express Pluses going into their beta sites, and there was talk of thousands of Walmart stores getting these stations. And again, the question of whether ChargePoint could fulfill the production capacity necessary for these orders was being brought into question. So two very large contracts being stared down. However, we started to see that pivots in both of those two CPOs, Walmart and Mercedes-Benz, both of them transitioned to Alpitronic. So Alpitronic and Kempower dominate Europe. I was at a event and someone brought into question, if you want to see what's going on in the United States, what does Europe look like? And the answer is it's Tesla superchargers, Alpitronic hyperchargers, and Kempower. Those are the predominant installation of charging hardware throughout Europe. And once Alpitronic and Kempower made a foothold in North America, the thought was it very likely could be inevitable that the same thing is replicated here. And so far that seems to be happening in rapid succession. Multiple announcements of wins for Alpitronic specifically. It's BP Pulse, Mercedes-Benz high-powered charging, Iona, Walmart. All these dominoes started to fall in Alpitronic's favor. And Kempower has kind of a unique model where they work well with fleets and also smaller CPOs for more niche builds, but still a very compelling product offering that directly competes with Kempower, and they don't really have the ability or have the need in order to nickel dime their customers. They're selling hardware. Yes, they can provide support services after the fact with a sort of subscription, but it's not like for all the payment processing, you're having to come back to the vendor in order to be nickel and dime to death. Instead, these two manufacturers run on something called OCPP, which is a European requirement for electric vehicle charging hardware, which allows the obfuscation of the payment processing into a more standardized interface. So a payment provider can vie for the business of an Alpitronic or a Kempower station. And Kempower and Alpitronic are not really a part of that. It's a third party that does it. And it makes the cost for running the station decrease because you're not locked into a single vendor. There's more competition. And should one go out of business, you're able to quickly port over to another one. And it's in the best interest of the consumer, and it creates a very healthy marketplace. ChargePoint does not participate in OCPP, and that's a problem, which I'll get to in just a second. But regardless, it was pretty clear that through 2024, ChargePoint was in trouble. The first notice we got was this in January 2024, a reorganization and a decrease in staff. The decrease was 12% of the overall staff was going to be cut, and they're going to be restructuring $14 million with $10 million in severance, and this press release was issued. Later on in the year, that wasn't it. There were more layoffs coming. Second round of layoffs. This was announced in September, and this was another 15% of the workers getting laid off. So now we're up to almost 30% of the workers from ChargePoint have been dismissed, a pretty significant downsize. I have to assume that's a direct result of losing those contracts, but regardless, let me just keep going on here because there's more. This was a post recently on LinkedIn where ChargePoint was buying themselves as a solution for fleet electrification back at the depot. And as you can see, a bunch of ChargePoint Express Pluses that are designed for pull-through of buses at a bus depot. And, domestic manufacturer, that really does make sense. A couple other things they were doing through this time period also is trying to get some more product distinction to the ChargePoint brand. They came out with the OmniPort, which is a way of doing a J3400 adapter built into the station. So if you're a different type of car like a Tesla or a OEM car that has a J3400, you could use the OmniPort on ChargePoint stations, or vice versa. You could have a ChargePoint station with a J3400 handle and put a J1772 or a CCS1 handle into your ChargePoint charger. Also, they came up with a way of doing anti-theft responses with both software and a hardened cable as well, which is something that Alpitronic and Kempower do not have. And so they're trying to do something with product distinction and pivot away from the large CPOs that are getting ready to sink $1 billion of their hard-earned cash into putting electric vehicle charging on their properties, like Mercedes-Benz, BP Pulse, Shell Recharge, and Walmart. But it didn't look to be panning out. And just this week, we learned ChargePoint received the notice of noncompliance for the New York Stock Exchange trading, which means that once your stock price dips below $1 for a 30-day consecutive period, you're notified of impending delisting. Now, the immediate effect of a delisting is that you can't raise capital from the New York Stock Exchange. You have to pivot to an alternative market, assuming you could be listed. And you will be able to, ChargePoint would be able to, but the bigger problem is a very large black eye for the ChargePoint brand getting delisted off the New York Stock Exchange. So now, as I'm a customer, I'm hearing the news that ChargePoint just got delisted from the New York Stock Exchange. Do I want to spend $2 million in order to put a bunch of ChargePoint hardware on my property? And the bigger problem is that ChargePoint is not OCPP compliant. So should ChargePoint cease operations, I now have a metal cabinet on my property that I paid $2 million for that I could do nothing with anymore. It is a piece of metal that might as well remove and put in the dumpster. It is a stranded asset, and unless someone comes and saves ChargePoint with a bunch of, but who's going to do that? They would have to basically reinvent themselves and come into some kind of competitive marketplace with Alpitronic and Kempower. And this whole pivot to fleet is really where Kempower lives and breathes. So they're going to be trying to survive in a cutthroat marketing pitch to customers who, as they leave the room, Kempower is going to be coming into the room and saying, yeah, you could do that, and spend all this nickel and diming with their non-compliant, non-open proprietary solution. Or you could buy our hardware, which is proven to be rock solid, very dependable, and open for use with any payment processor. And it's a very easy decision. It also, I believe, costs less. I mean, obviously, I've never solicited the cost for a ChargePoint Express Plus deployment versus a Kempower, but I'm pretty confident that the Kempower costs less. All that said, it's very dark days for ChargePoint. I think another round of layoffs is coming, and very likely a snowball. Once you have a brain drain and a lack of new customers, it's just a matter of time before operations have insufficient cash flow to maintain the operations. And once that happens, the only thing left is bankruptcy. So I don't know what the answer is, but all the indicators are there, and it is really going to be a hard pill to swallow should ChargePoint cease operations, just because of all the stranded assets that are out there and all the people who invested money into ChargePoint technology, which will be looking at the whole concept of electric vehicle station operations as a lost cause, and be a very difficult prospect for people who are thinking of going into the electric vehicle charging. And again, I work in technology, and technology companies come and go, and that's one of the things that you go through when you're working with technology, is that recognition that that company might not be around long term. And the European folks might show up and start doing something better. And in the case of the United States, normally the folks in Silicon Valley can cook up something that's better than the Europeans. But in this case, the Europeans have actually cooked up something that is more compelling than the folks in Silicon Valley. Anyway, sorry for the bad news, but I do think it is a relevant and timely topic, and something, sadly, that we have to keep an eye on through 2025. Thanks for watching.